Welcome to today's conversation with Milind Gandhe. He is the Chief Program Officer at MINRO, that is MINRO, at IIIT Bangalore. Milind is an accomplished senior management professional who holds nearly 18 years of experience in embedded services, PLN management, product development, and more. He also has deep knowledge of technologies like protocol stacks, multimedia, chip design, drivers, connectivity, and Android. And he holds a very strong know-how in the markets such as handsets, semiconductor, automotive, and consumer electronics. So Milind, welcome to our conversation. Today, we will discuss about the shortage of semiconductors and its impact on auto and healthcare industry. So Milind, we all are aware of the fact that there is a sudden surge in the demand for electronic devices, and which has resulted in the shortage of semiconductors globally. So do you think there are other reasons and factors leading to this shortage?
So there are definitely multiple reasons, right? I think you need to look at some global reasons and some very local reasons. Mm-hmm. One aspect, of course, is COVID. And what happened was, if you go back maybe 15 months or so, and I'm looking now at Q1 of calendar 2020, people anticipated a significant drop in global shipments, particularly of cars, right? And that is true. So if you really look at 2019, there were probably something like 83 million cars sold worldwide. Mm-hmm. I don't remember exactly, but somewhere close to 70 million were sold in 2020. So there was a drop indeed in the automotive shipments. But anticipating this drop, I think what happened was the car companies sort of went ahead and canceled a lot of the orders. See, one thing we have to remember is that the automotive supply chain is extremely just in time. There is very little sort of redundancy that's there in the supply chain. And therefore, the supply chain is very sensitive to changes in demand, right? So the little bit of increase in demand leads to a strong push at the back. A little bit of excess in terms of supply also leads to a strong pushback. So going back 15 months, car companies sort of slashed their orders with the semiconductor companies. And so the semiconductor companies had excess capacity. Now, the good news for the semiconductor companies, for companies like TSMC, was that there were other sectors that were picking up because there was a great move towards work from home. Sales, particularly of devices such as mobile phones and laptops, went up. So you would see that there was almost like 17% growth in global laptop sales. If you look at Q4 of 2020, we had something like 60 million laptops sold. Mobile phones as well, the market has held there more or less steady. Again, people had expected a fall. So in Q1 of 2020, the global sales dropped from 350 million units to close to 200 million units. But almost the next quarter, we were immediately back to the 330, 340. So while there was orders were being cut by the automotive companies, orders were growing with laptop and mobile phone companies, and also servers, right? Because as people started working from home, there was more and more demand on cloud services. There was, people started watching much more Netflix and Amazon compared to going out to movie theaters. So there was an overall change in the product mix, and semiconductor companies started allocating more of their manufacturing capacity to devices such as servers, laptops, and phones. And everything seemed to be okay until car companies realized that the car demand was not falling as much as they anticipated, and that H2 of 2020 was going to be more or less back on track to normal, right? So again, you had close to 40 million units being sold in 2020. And so suddenly now automotive companies had a massive order that they were placing on semiconductor companies, and the semiconductor companies just didn't have the capacity. So this is a supply chain view. Now, compounding this, there is an issue in terms of a little bit of trade tension between US and China. So if you see, most modern chips are sub 10 nanometers. So they're typically 7 nanometers, especially in phones and laptops. And the US, I think towards the end of 2019, said that companies based in the US could not buy sub 10 nanometers chip from China, which means a lot of the production capacity went off demand, of the supply chain. In parallel, anticipating that there would be supply shortages because of this trade war, many companies started placing double orders, right? So they wanted to stock up. Huawei, as an example, towards the end of 19, placed huge orders because they wanted to stock up on silicon. They were anticipating that they would not be able to buy silicon in the open market. So there were these couple of things, and then there are some very, very local factors playing out. I don't, the Indian media doesn't cover it too much, but there is today a drought playing out in Taiwan, and water is a very important component when you're doing silicon manufacturing. So ability to expand capacity becomes a problem when there's a drought. So Taiwan has a drought. In February of this year, there was a massive cold spell in Texas, and the energy supply was hit. So that also hit silicon production for almost 3-4 weeks. So there are some very very specific local factors, and then there's the global demand picture.
Okay. So, Milind, talking about the local factors like the Texas one and the Taiwan water shortage, I think not many people have considered those aspects when speaking about the shortage and what resulted in them. So very nice view that you have come up with. But then obviously there are many reports that say that the shortage will last till 2023. So what do you think about this shortage and how we are going to counter this shortage?
2023, end of 2022 for certain, it does look like that way. And because it just seems that, definitely demand has proven to be far more robust. I think given that there is loose monetary policy in the US specifically, but all over the world, we do see a very strong demand going in for the next 2 years. So I would expect that demand would continue to outstrip supply. What do we do? I think in India, there is pretty much little that we can do. The kind of time horizons that we are looking at, I don't think there's enough of a semiconductor industry in India today for us to do anything. Globally, of course, you can see that there are a couple of things that's going on, right? I think there are three sort of key factors that you should look at. One is TSMC themselves have announced almost a $2.5 billion investment in a new fab. And that will be excess capacity that comes online in Taiwan. How they work through the drought remains to be seen. But that is one. South Korea, the government of South Korea, along with Samsung and Hynix, have announced almost a $10 billion investment. And that would definitely, of course, some of it will go off towards memory, but that is also still a significant investment. And then the US government, I think there was a fairly significant bipartisan bill that got passed, was it 2 or 3 days ago, which approves very, very strong investment in semiconductor manufacturing in the US. So we are going to see, I think, a little bit of a shift in terms of manufacturing capacity moving back into the US. Intel, as an example, has announced a $3.1 billion investment in a fab in Arizona. And I would expect that you would see more and more companies. I think the US is now beginning to view silicon as a strategic asset, and they are going to insist on more production capacity in the US. I think TSMC is also looking at building some fabs in the US. So you would see, I would see, there are these three sort of broad vectors: increased capacity in Taiwan, increased government and industrial investment in South Korea, and then the US trying to bring more and more capacity back into the US.
Okay. So, though there is still time, we catch up with the demand and supply gap, we fill in that, the industry is going to get impacted, stay that way for some time. How is this going to impact the auto industry and the healthcare sector? Because now, with everything going digital, healthcare, we need so much of semiconductors inside even the healthcare equipment. So, how are we going to handle that situation now?
Healthcare, I'm not sure. Okay, that's not a
Mm-hmm.
sector that I've looked at very closely from a silicon perspective.
Okay.
The automotive industry, I think, needs to rethink the value chain. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
the automotive industry for several decades now has really, really focused on lean manufacturing,
Mm-hmm.
and I think one lesson that the pandemic has taught us, it is that lean manufacturing does not lead to resilient supply chains. So if you need resilience, then you need some buffers allocated in the supply chain. These auto industry has also discovered to its surprise that they are not the gorilla in terms of purchasing power in the semiconductor market. I think the auto industry, in most of its suppliers' cases, is used to being, getting priority attention, and they were sort of surprised that the semiconductor industry didn't give them priority attention. For the semiconductor industry, I think computing and communications are two far more important verticals compared to auto.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what we will see is increasingly auto industry also building in-house capability in terms of fabs. I think one big step was Bosch recently announced a $1.2 billion factory fab in Germany
Germany,
to
yes.
build a fab specifically for automotive needs. So there will be, I think, some of those changes. You would see much more vertical integration, I suspect, in the automotive industry as far as silicon is concerned, than we've seen in the past.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So, in-house fab facility is one of the alternatives. Are there any other alternatives you could think about?
No, I think, to be honest, right, the quantity of silicon in the car is going to increase. I think that is a given.
Mm-hmm.
If you look at what a car was, let's say 10 or 15 years ago, it was a largely electromechanical device. It was basically mechanical engineering with a very little of uh, power electronics thrown in. There was very little compute. Uh, Today, a car is fundamentally a compute platform. The mechanical aspects of the car are almost like an add-on. It's not, and that has been a dramatic shift, right? The architecture could change, and I suspect it will change. So today, what happens is that you probably have upwards of 100 microcontrollers in an high-end car. My suspicion is that the architecture could change where you move to more of a domain controller kind of an architecture. So
Mm-hmm.
instead of having 100 tiny microcontrollers, you could move to 4 or 5 large compute platforms. So you could have something that's controlling driving, there's something controlling, let's say, body, something that's controlling transmission, something, so maybe 4 or 5 chips. There is really no reason why you can't make a car, let's say, with not more than 10 chips. Today, you probably have upwards of 100. So some amount of change in architecture could, reduce demand in terms of volumes, right? So instead of 100 small pieces, you have 10 big pieces kind of thing. But nonetheless, I would think that the silicon content in the car, we are going to see a secular growth for the next 10 to 15 years at the very least. And the car industry just needs to learn how to manage its silicon supply chain better.
Nice. So is the government going to play any role in this, like setting up the fabs? If basically I look into India, so are we looking into having some fabs here, India becoming a manufacturing hub when it comes to
It's a
silicon?
little challenging, right? I think India also is now beginning to look at silicon as a strategic asset. And to that extent, there is definitely a governmental policy push to move more and more of manufacturing capability into India. But having said that, Anamika, to be honest, India is nowhere in the global silicon manufacturing chain. We are good users of silicon. There are a couple of companies that are doing quite a bit in terms of assembly and test. I can think of Tessolve, a Hero Group company, as one of the leaders. But other than them, there is, at least to my knowledge, there is very little in terms of assembly and in terms of manufacturing that happens in India. And the point is, this is such a complex technology. These are such large projects that unless you gain knowledge incrementally, it's going to be a challenge, right? So if you just heard the numbers that I was talking about, any one investment seemed to be upwards of $2.5 billion, and that's not, not small. So I think it's an interesting challenge. It's a challenge that I think the Indian government and Indian industry have not been able to solve for the last 20 years. And I, for one, would be very curious how we solve it.
Nice. I follow you now. And yes, when you speak about, or when we speak about India becoming a manufacturing hub, maybe potentially any time, or there is any plans in becoming a manufacturing hub for silicon, do you think that India as a nation is ready? Because we face water scarcity and we have many other challenges here. So are these and others going to play a kind of a roadblock or bottleneck when it comes to establishing India as a manufacturing hub?
There are many challenges, right? I think there are 2 or 3 key challenges in the country. One is scarcity of power. The other is scarcity of water. Silicon manufacturing is extremely power intensive as well as water intensive. I think if we really want to see what India can do to become a significant manufacturing hub, I think we should look to the automotive industry. While we often sort of underplay India's manufacturing capability, it's not very well appreciated that India has significant automotive manufacturing capacity that is built up. Almost 50% of India's India's manufacturing base actually is automotive today. And it's a lot of it, of course, is the domestic market. Now, India is already 5% of the world market in terms of volumes. But actually, our manufacturing is also export oriented. It is in low end cars for certain, but there is a significant manufacturing base, and that has happened in clusters, right? So you've got a sort of Chennai, Sri Perumbudur, Maraimalai Nagar sort of cluster. There is a cluster that's sort of grown up around Pune. There's a cluster that has grown up in Haryana. So I think these are sort of 2 or 3 clusters, and there is a significant technology know-how impact that these sort of clusters have. And I think we would do well by looking at some of this. First is we would do well by bringing some electronics manufacturing capability into the country and sort of incubating clusters where there is overall electronic manufacturing know-how. To my mind, more than power and water, the biggest shortage India has is in terms of know-how. And manufacturing silicon is enormously difficult technically. And building that sort of know-how is not an overnight task. It's a multi-year project. So that's really one way of looking at it, right?
True. So, how can the country, the companies, the government, and the academians like IIIT can work together to help make India and put India on the global map when it comes to silicon? Is there anything that can be done?
I think it's important to identify individual processes. Uh, Silicon manufacturing is a multi-step process, and I think assembly and test packaging assembly and test would be a good way to take a first step. So it may make sense to uh, just start off by putting together package assembly and test plants
Mm-hmm.
and see and grow your capacity there. Then look at backward integration and see how much of that capacity that you can then bring into the country.
Mm-hmm. Nice. So, Milind, would you like to add anything to our conversation?
Hmm. No, I think there is opportunity definitely in this space
Mm-hmm.
in terms of manufacturing. There is definitely opportunity both for industry as well as regional localities, right? In terms of Bangalore being a center for IT, I'm sure
Mm-hmm.
there is an opportunity for some other city to become a center for silicon manufacturing. Uh, but it's a step-by-step process. It's never going to happen by one big bang sort of capacity building. Uh, yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Milind, for joining with us today for this conversation. And we got a lot of insight about the electronic industry, the semiconductor, and how India is going to move ahead, or what could be the way for India. And we thank you for that. Let's
Thanks,
stay
Anamika.
connected.
Sure.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.